Brian, I'm going to be completely honest. I'm quite honored that you are in your professional office today, not in
my guest room.
not in your spare bedroom. Wow, it's a big day. We're obviously moving up. What are you doing?
Sometimes spare bedroom, sometimes office.
You got to mix it up.
Yeah.
We have good angles today. So those of you who are listening to the podcast, make sure you can check us out there on the YouTubes, youtube.com/sportsnerds. But it looks different. People are getting a different view of us.
Different, yeah.
I like it. I dig it. We're also on Instagram at sports.nerds, at sports.nerds. And then we are on Twitter at _sportsnerds. Brian, how's your morning going?
Good. A little hectic considering it's only 9:30, but we're alive. We made it. Had some coffee. You?
Good, man.
School? I don't know.
Kids are up. I've been up. I got up at 4 this morning because I know. I've got a meeting. What do I have to do today? I know what. I've got a meeting this afternoon with a guy who writes for Forbes. He does sports research for Forbes, and he lives here in Denver. And I'm gonna have a meeting with him this afternoon. Maybe get him on the show. He does some cool stuff, like sports economics stuff.
That sounds cool.
Yeah, that's going to happen. Somebody else reached out to us. Oh, there's a PhD student from Canada, a guy that follows us on Instagram who would like to jump on the show and talk about sports psychology. He's getting in psychology in sports, and he wants to talk about the psychology of fans, which I know that you had discussed maybe writing some sort of academic paper about that. So maybe that'll be the jump start we need.
Yeah, no, that's still definitely something I'm curious about.
And then lastly, before we jump into our content for the day, folks who are watching on Facebook or YouTube or Instagram, Monday at 12:30 Mountain Time, 2:30 Eastern Time, Brian and I will be talking with Dr. Daniel Lair and Dr. Brendan Kendall about sports ethics. And I think in particular, we're going to really try to discuss how sports fans, consumers of sports, sports commentators reframe the issues with sports in ways that allow them to still consume sports without feeling bad about it. Is that a pretty fair assessment?
Yeah. So are we rationalizing to explain our fanmanship or fanship? Yeah, it's an interesting question.
Should be good. Brandon Kendall is a communication ethics expert, and then Dr. Dan Lair, he is a rhetorician like Brian and I, but also a kind of OrgComm scholar, organizational communication scholar. It should be good. I'm gonna get both of them here in the radio in the sound booth, and then Brian, you'll be chiming in from afar
from my guest room.
Yeah, from your guest room. So I'm looking forward to it. Are you looking forward to it?
Yeah, no, it'll be fun.
Yeah, I think we've been trying to get Dan on the show for years, so
it's surprising it's taken this long.
It'll be nice now that he's here, right? Now that he's here in Denver, we can make it happen. But today, for those who are going to stick in for the whole time, and I think you will, I hope you will, we're going to begin with a little talk about the MLB playoffs. As Brian had kind of pointed out, there's not a lot to discuss, but there are a couple races for us to unpack and kind of talk about moving forward. And then we're going to jump into this really cool article that, or not article, but a research program put together by a professor. I can't remember where he is, which school he's at. I'll have to figure it out while we're talking about it. He basically does a in-depth statistical analysis of home field advantage. Deadspin ran the article, and Brian and I picked it up this week, and we want to talk about it. I think your sister pointed it out to you, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So thanks, Meg. Appreciate that. And then we'll
Even
end.
if you don't want to read that whole article, just the graphic is sweet.
Yeah, and the graphics should be up on Instagram. We posted it on there for those of you who are listening to podcasts. Those of you who are watching live, that post will come later today. But the link is on there as well with a little information about how you can access it. And then we'll end obviously with the 300-pound, 500-pound gorilla, which is probably a really, really bad metaphor considering the topic, of Serena Williams and what happened last weekend at the U.S. Open, as well as the fallout, in particular, the Australian newspaper cartoon. So let's jump into it. Brian, Schrader, MLB playoffs, I think the only tight races, as you had pointed out, really the NL West, which remains pretty close, correct? I got to pull up our numbers here, our data, or the standings. So the NL West, it looks like, how many games back are the Dodgers now?
1, I believe.
So the Dodgers are
1 back of the Rockies, and then Arizona's 4 back of them, I think.
Okay.
Oh no, Dodgers are a game and a half back. Arizona's 4.5 back.
Okay, so we can. I mean, it's going to be tough for Arizona at this point to catch either the Rockies or the Dodgers, but it certainly looks like there's a lot of baseball to play, and so that division is certainly still up for grabs. So the other thing is the NL wild card, which if we look at these numbers, Milwaukee Milwaukee is 3 games up on St. Louis for the top spot. St. Louis obviously has that second spot. They have a 1-game lead on the Dodgers and then a 4-game lead on the Diamondbacks. The Phillies are basically out of it. The Phillies had a good run, though. Props to them.
Well, I mean, they lost 5 straight, right? They were in it, and then lost 5 straight to Washington.
Young team. Something we talked about.
I mean, what do we got? 14, 15 games left. Philadelphia and Washington both have wild card elimination numbers, at 9 and 11 respectively. Pittsburgh is a 9 number. Those are not numbers that you expect to get in, right? Those E numbers are the magic number, sometimes they call it, is anytime you lose or someone ahead of you wins, your E number goes down, your magic number goes down. So basically those teams would have to, win 80% of their games and have people in front of them lose, about the same number. Maybe that math is wrong. That's a little back of the napkin math for you. But there's a possibility for that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember that Red Sox team? I don't remember how many years ago with Bobby Valentine. No, it was the last one with Terry Francona before Bobby Valentine, when the Red Sox were, had a end of September where they won like 2 baseball games or something, and tumbled from a division race to being atop a wild card to falling out of that wild card race on the last game of the season. So I mean, I'm not projecting that. I'm not predicting that. I'm not that's not my projection. But I'm saying that there's some, depending on how those matchups go, there's room for that sort of thing to happen. I mean, Pittsburgh's going to go play Miami. They're the worst team in the National League. Philadelphia's going to go play Miami. That's the worst team in the National League. I guess Pittsburgh has to go play Milwaukee, so that's probably a harder series. I don't know.
I think the one thing that I guess I take from this is, or that I worry about, I think I mentioned this to you, as a Cubs fan, a hot Dodgers team going into the playoffs looks really, really scary to me. And last night, man, they put up some runs. I understand that Kershaw got beat up a little bit. Kenley Jensen doesn't look great, but they've got a tough team, obviously, top to bottom. I mean, I think they built it halfway through the season in order to make that playoff run. I don't know.
They have the best run differential in the National League, man.
Yeah.
699 runs scored, 564 runs against. Gives them a projected win-loss of 88 and 59, which is by far the best team in the National League.
Yep.
Oh, wait, is that true? Yeah.
I know. Well, the Cubs are the best team in the National League at the moment.
No, but the Dodgers' projected win-loss based on run differential would put them at 88 wins.
Yes.
I'm saying the Dodgers are good. You're right. You're right to fear the Dodgers. That's a team that if it makes the playoffs, should be fine. The hardest thing they'll have to do in the playoffs is win a 1-game wild card, right?
Yeah, that's going to be it. I think they have a lot of incentive just to try to win that division, because they could need, getting Kershaw some extra rest, getting Kenley Jensen some days off. Man, that dude he got beat up last night. Yeah. He's going to have heart surgery in the offseason. Wow. He's got a bad heart. He's a big fella.
That really is a thing, though, I think, too. Like, getting to the postseason hot matters a lot, but also, do you have to fight to make it there? I guess there's the opposite argument, like the 2007 Rockies, who, every single game mattered from, like, August 15th on. So, there was no such thing as playoff pressure. It was like win or go home for them for a month and a half. So maybe the same thing could be true for the Dodgers. I know the AL's pretty much wrapped up.
Let's talk about that for a second.
Any thoughts there? I'm really interested in this A's Houston thing going on in the West. Yeah, because I think if Oakland can, 3.5 games back, that's totally gettable. They'll probably play again. I don't know off the top of my head if they will, but you play so many games against your own division. Usually play 19 games against your division. I wouldn't be surprised if they had a series against them left here in the home stretch. If Oakland can manage to unseat Houston and win that division spot, that would mean that Houston at 92 wins today would have to play the Yankees at 90 wins, both way more than any team in the National League, right? In a 1-game wild card. Yeah. You would have 2 of the top 3 or 4 teams in baseball playing in a wild card, and then the winner of that series would play the Red Sox.
Do the A's as a Red Sox fan scare you at all?
Dude, as a Red Sox fan, every team scares me. Our capacity for choking is, legendary.
I'm just wondering. I mean, those are some really, really strong teams. That's crazy.
Well, yeah, I'll be honest. I think the AL is so good this year that despite some flukiness, I think an AL team's going to win the World Series. I'll probably eat my words on that. Let me ask you this question. There's been discussion about this in the NBA for a long time about reseeding top to bottom.
Yep.
And even doing it across Eastern and Western Conference, right? And I think the reasoning for this is that the Western Conference, many people think, I am one of them, that the Western Conference is stacked. It's a lot harder to make it out of the Western Conference. And in the Eastern Conference, oftentimes you have the top 1 or 2 seeds, not even a 500 basketball team, right? Beating Milwaukee in the first round is
Sure.
like I've made this argument before. I think Cleveland and LeBron making it to the NBA Finals as many times as he has is really impressive, but it's less impressive out of the Eastern Conference than it would be out of the Western Conference. Is there an argument for doing some sort of reseeding in baseball?
Well, how would you do it then? So, would you?
The way to do it, the way Stern wants to do it in basketball. That's not Stern anymore, is it? Adam Silver.
Yeah, Adam Silver.
Whoever the commissioner is, that other dude.
Yep.
Wants to do it is to just reseed by record.
So it doesn't really.
The top record gets the 1 seed, the second record gets the 2 seed. You get rid of conferences. I mean, you get rid of, for the purposes of the playoffs, you get rid of AL, NL, or you don't make the wild card the wild card team, like the Yankees, who have the third best record in baseball, would not play in the wild card game. Instead, it would be Cleveland right now with 82 wins playing Oakland with 89 wins, even though Cleveland will win the Central. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Because why do we want to reward Cleveland? That's a good baseball team, and I'm not talking shit, but the Central's terrible. The second place team in the Central is the Twins, who are 12 games below 500. Right? Like, why does Cleveland get to walk to a division series when 2 teams with better records, like way better records, 8-10 wins better, have to play in a 1-game wild card?
I guess I would just be interested to see. There's so many logistics that go into it that I would want to see how that would play out. I would love that. That would be great. But again, how would it work? How would they actually make that happen? I don't know. I think it would be.
They just seed in one way now. You would just seed in a different way.
I'll tell you what.
Let me ask you this: the premise of a tournament, right, should be that the best 2 teams meet in the finals.
Yeah, obviously.
The system in baseball now precludes that because I think by any measure, like just bear with me for 1 second. I'm going to go to 538.
No, you're fine. I'm just wondering, again, I totally agree it should be the best teams that meet in those finals. I just don't know how logistically it would happen, because what if you had
this is what we do in March Madness, right? Like, that's why we have 1 seeds, is to protect them. We want those 1 seeds to be in the Final Four because theoretically they're the best teams. 538, based on their ELO rankings or whatever, has the Astros as the best team in baseball, despite not having the best record. The Red Sox as the second best team. The Yankees as the third best team. And by the way, I threw the Athletics into this mix. They're ranked as the 4th best team. Right? So no matter how you slice it at this point, the AL wildcard game is going to involve the Yankees. They can't catch the Red Sox. Well, mathematically they could, but they're probably not going to. Right? And the Yankees are either going to play the Athletics, the 4th best team in baseball, or the Astros, the 1st best team in baseball. That is a legit World Series matchup. Why in the world are we having a 1-game wildcard series where 3 of the 4 best teams in baseball could conceivably be involved?
It would just be difficult with, I guess, the setup of the actual league, which I'm particularly thinking about the DH difference. You would have to integrate the DH across the entire league or eliminate it across the entire league. There have to be a similarity there.
Yeah, I agree. We should all have a DH. The DH is awesome.
I know you're a big fan of it.
You don't have to do that because you could still just play home rules, right? You could say if you have a DH, if it's an NL park, no DH. If it's an AL park, have a DH. I'm just saying, if the concern with Major League Baseball is viewership and stuff like that, maybe it's not a pitch count, maybe it's not the pace of play, maybe it's not having the best product on the field in the end of October, beginning of November, right? The World Series that I want to see right now is some combination of Astros, Red Sox, Yankees, Dodgers, right? Maybe the Cubs. Throw you a bone there.
Hey, thanks, buddy. I have not. I don't have a ton of confidence for the Cubbies coming into the playoffs at all, man. There was a move. I guess we're gonna obviously timestamp our show here. Last night I was watching the game while doing some work, and the Cubs were up one in the top of the 10th, and bases loaded. And Joe Madden, for some reason, kept Pedro Strop in there to hit. Did you watch this?
Mm-mm.
Did you see this?
No.
And Strop, hits just a ground ball and sprints to first, and it appears that he actually pulled his hamstring, and they took him out of the game. So not only do you have a lead, not only do you have a guy that you probably should pinch hit for, but you let him hit, and then he gets hurt. Right? A guy who's been really solid.
Doesn't matter all that much.
Well, but it kind of did. It did in the sense. No, the problem is it did matter, and he treated it as if he didn't by keeping that pitcher in there.
Oh,
I guess I thought, yeah. I mean, the Cubs are up one, bases loaded with one out. They had a chance to put another 1 or 2 runs up there, and it didn't happen. I don't know. There's a lot of people.
I misunderstood. No, you're right.
A lot of people mad at Joe Madden. A lot of people just unhappy with Joe Madden this year. So for good reason, I think. In my honest opinion,
this is never going to happen. This is just a stupid thought experiment. But I just think Astros Red Sox World Series more interesting than Brewers Athletics because of the peculiarities of the way the wild card stuff works.
Agree.
There's a version of this where I think I'm beating a dead horse here or whatever, but there's a version of this where the wild card game in the AL features 2 top 5 teams, 2 top 4 teams, or whatever, and then the division series features maybe even better than that, right? 2 top 3 teams or something, and then by virtue of 2 of those top 5 teams, top 4 teams being eliminated at that point, the ALCS can't be as good. It has to have a worse team, right? Because 2 of those top teams have been eliminated, and then another one of those teams has to get eliminated. That means the World Series again has to be worse. If my logic is making sense here.
I think it does make sense. Again, I think we're working against tradition here, and we're working against a playoff structure that has not necessarily been advanced much over the last 100 years. I mean, I guess the integration of a new wild card is great, but like you and I have talked on the show before, the fact that it's a 1-game playoff is such a problem. Let's move on.
Get rid of it or do 3 games.
Exactly. All right, we're going to move on because I know we're going to end up going for a long, long talk about the Serena thing. Next thing would be that article from Deadspin about home field advantage. I'm going to get to the details really fast here. Michael Lopez, Director of Data and Analytics for the NFL. He's from Skidmore, stats professor at Skidmore. Stats by Lopez, actually a really, really strong follow on Twitter. He seems to be a super engaging guy. He actually said something to us on our Twitter feed, so that was nice. Who did I'm just going to break down the specifics of this so I don't misspeak. The paper is titled, How Often Does the Best Team Win? A Unified Approach to Understanding Randomness in North American Sport, with co-author, okay, I will skip that. It's going to be published in the Annals of Applied Science. What was his, okay.
The
what? The Annals, not Annals, not Annals. Okay. Okay, what did he do here? He pulls out some interesting stuff from his post.
Good joke for 10 in the morning.
That was good. That was strong. Nice work. I wanted to get to how the calculations are pretty extensive, right? They're complex calculations. Basically, it's how if you were probability of beating an equal caliber opponent at home. There we go. That's what I was looking for, right? So this is what the statistic is. What is the probability of your team beating an equal caliber component at home, right? If they were even. And in every single sport, Denver is at the top, which is
altitude matters, right?
Altitude appears to really matter. Well, obviously, we think so. He doesn't come to that conclusion. He's just looking at the data, but it's just an interesting kind of graphic. I thought it's a really cool graph to look at.
Yeah.
The other thing, and the reason why Brian pointed out the altitude matters. The Utah Jazz are right up there, and then the Calgary Flames are up there as well, the other 2 highest cities in professional sports. It's a really cool little graph, so I would suggest everybody take a look at it. Brian, can you post it to Facebook? Are you able to right now?
The article
to our Facebook? Yeah, to the article on our Facebook feed. That would be awesome. So did you have anything that you wanted to take from this other than it's kind of cool?
I mean, yeah, it confirms a lot of things that we already suspected, but it also, I mean, the thing that this does that's really interesting is it compares all 4 major sports, right? So you can see how much does the home field advantage matter by sport, right? So his math says it matters way more in basketball than it does in, at the very bottom is baseball. And that kind of makes sense if we think that altitude has a lot to do with it, because, if you're a team that's coming from sea level and you're coming to Denver, this was the George Karl MO for the Nuggets for a long time, was running people out of the gym, right?
Yeah.
It would just show up and be like, we train here, you don't. We're used to the altitude, you're not. And so it's a not more athletic sport, but it's a more aerobic sport. There's a lot of back and forth to it. The one that I can't really explain is number 2 on this list as most affected is football, right? Where, there's a lot of running in that, but it's also very much stop and start, and hockey's number 3. And maybe he has an explanation that I don't understand. I know in hockey they switch so much more. They switch every, 45 seconds for line changes. So maybe, you go full blast and then you get off. The altitude doesn't matter quite as much. But there's 2 other things here that are really telling. One, baseball's at the very bottom, right? We're constantly hearing things like, oh, the Rockies have such a massive advantage. And based on this graph, the home field advantage the Rockies have over other baseball teams is pretty slim. And it looks like altitude matters far less in baseball than it does in other sports. The other reason for this, too, is that there's so much more. I don't know if parity is the right word, but the way the game is played, games tend to be a lot closer, and really anybody can beat anybody, right? If you're a dominant basketball team or football team, you can go undefeated. You can have a 75% win loss, that sort of thing. In baseball, a really great team hovers around 68% win loss. That's a great team, right? And if you're a 55% win loss team, you could be in the playoffs, right? And we're seeing that this year. So in baseball, it just doesn't matter quite as much. But I do find this really interesting. The only aberration in this graph, the biggest home field advantage is first every single football team kind of ranked in order, then every single basketball team, then every single football team, then every single hockey team, with the exception of the Rockies. All the baseball teams are at the very bottom, but the Rockies actually have a bigger home field advantage than the Ottawa Senators, the Winnipeg Jets, or the New York Islanders have in a hockey one. You have to see the graph; it's color coded, but it really stands out like a sore thumb. But
it is. It really does.
It's kind of awesome. So, despite the fact that this graph sort of shows that the home field advantage matters less in baseball than it does in any other sport, right? Because of altitude, or because of the 12th man, or because of whatever things we think matter for home field advantage. The Rockies' advantage at home is so overwhelming in baseball. It really is. It's like it does stick out like crazy.
It really does stand out. Yeah,
it's nuts.
That's also the one outlier that kind of works against, I would argue, the you have to be in shape to play here argument, because they have such a significant, baseball is the one sport where I don't think you have to be in the most fantastic shape, but yet the Rockies have such this advantage because of where they play. I wish we could get a sports physiologist on here or something, because that would be quite interesting to discuss. Because I think you could make the argument that basketball is such a significant. You have to be in shape, I suppose, because you're running so often. I wish they had soccer on here, because that would be an even more telling reading.
Well, and then if you had soccer on here too, especially not just like MLS but World Soccer, then the Mexico Stadium, the Azteca or whatever it's called in Mexico City, which is higher than Mile High, right? It's at like 7,000 feet or 8,000 feet or something like that. I know every time the USA team goes there, they're like, it's like when a sea level team comes to Denver, it's the same thing. They're like, it's a really hard place to go and play because the altitude is just so extreme. So if we went outside of the mainstream sports, I think you might see some other interesting things. And to your point as well, basketball, you have to be really athletic. Hockey, you have to be really athletic. Soccer, though, it's not really stop and start. You're running all the time. They track those guys. If you watch enough soccer, when they sub them out, they'll say, "Oh, this guy ran a 10K." Ran however many, a shitload of miles.
Is there a way for all right, I've got all my computers kind of loaded up right now, so I can't do much. Is there a way for you to tweet to the Sports by Lopez guy and ask him if they're working on something in terms of soccer? Because I would be really, really interested in seeing that data. And I want to know if they're actually doing it. His name is, let me see, Michael Lopez, Stats by Lopez. Because if you see that big of a discrepancy or that big of an advantage based on soccer, I think that probably adds a lot of credence to the idea that you have to be in shape. And that's why Denver tends to benefit. And I don't know, can you even, just being in shape, get you anywhere in terms of dealing with the altitude? You ran here, right? You ran against teams that
Yeah, it's not about being in shape or not in shape. I think it's being acclimated to it.
Okay, interesting.
I mean,
I mean,
there's
that's why.
definitely, yeah. I mean, I ran in Colorado in high school and a little bit in college, and it's definitely I mean, I don't know what it's like to go from sea level to Denver and try and run, but I assume it feels like you can't catch your breath. But I know going from Denver, and I did races in California and other sea level places, Wisconsin, and it's really an interesting sensation because you just feel like you can run forever.
I mean,
Like
if sorry,
you're just not losing your breath. So I mean, it definitely, it's not like you are in better shape or worse shape. It's kind of just what you're used to. It's just being acclimated.
and I mean, think about the world's best distance runners, or at least the Western Hemisphere's best distance runners tend to come here to train, right? They train in Boulder. I mean, there's a shitload. Jenny Simpson's there. I'm trying to think who else that folks would know. You train in Boulder because, like you said, you get down to sea level and it's just easier. It's just wait. And drinking's also easier down there too, FYI. No,
Water.
nothing. Oh, I was talking about beer. I was talking you consume more beer without the buzz.
I can never remember which direction that's supposed to go.
It's supposed to. Well,
you get drunker easier at higher altitudes.
That's the argument, yeah, for sure. Hey, shout out to Fantasy Whisperers. Shout out to Troy Morgan who's watching. Hey, there's Robert Rutz. We're getting some folks that enjoy consuming our show.
As we start talking about beer and the ease with which you can get drunk places, people show up.
Hey, before we move on, because Derek Yoder just asked a really good question, and you could probably answer this way better than me. Do teams from Denver then have a better advantage on the road because they're acclimated? Because you just pointed out that when you ran at sea level, it was much easier. Did you see that? You think we see that from
Well, no, yeah, I think that's what this graph is saying is that the home field. Well,
the advantage.
Does it?
So maybe it's, but I guess the disadvantage is more significant than the advantage.
I think that's the right way to think about it because unless you're like a professional runner, I mean, and this is anecdotal. It's just my experience with it. When I ran at sea level, it was actually kind of confusing because you sort of have a pace in your mind that you're trying to hit, and it's hard to know how hard you can push it because you don't know how your body's going to respond. If that makes sense. Okay. So just about every time I did it, which was just a handful of races in high school, where I competed at sea level after training at altitude. Just when I was done, I was like, "Oh, I had a lot left. I should have ran harder." That was kind of my response. Like, "Oh, that was pretty easy. I should have." So I don't know. But if you're a professional basketball player, and maybe if we go down to sea level, you can push it harder. I just guessing. I suspect you're right though. The disadvantage of playing at altitude is probably greater than the advantage of playing at sea level.
We could just have Michael Lopez on the show, and that's probably what we should do. I'm sure he's a college professor like us two dorks. He might really be down for that. So I guess that's our project for the coming weeks. See if we can get him on the show to actually parse through this data, try to figure out why this stuff's happening. Okay, old buddy, let's move on to the big story. We got to, let's give ourselves 10, 12 minutes on this one. This weekend, or this past weekend, Serena Williams was in the final of the U.S. Open against, remind me of Naomi Osaka. Which is that's a major part of the story, right? As we kind of forget who she was actually playing. She's in the U.S. Open final, her second Grand Slam final of the year, and she has people are calling a meltdown. I don't know. I just went back. I went through and I watched the video again. I don't think she had a meltdown. She had a tantrum in the same way that John McEnroe had tantrums and other tennis players. They're just known for these tantrums, right? I don't know why tennis players tend to do it more. Maybe it's because we see their faces and they don't necessarily do it more. We just see their faces, so it's more pronounced. But anyhow, she gets penalized. It was in response, I think this is the important part, to the judge warning her about her coach coaching her. Let's start there. Right, I think then we can jump into the cartoon and the backlash. Do you think her coach was coaching her? You watch a lot of tennis, a lot more than me. Can you add to that?
Yeah, he was. I don't know what he was trying to tell her, and I don't know how useful it would be to get that information. He was doing this.
Well, he was. Yeah, I mean, yeah. Can you see Brian? He was putting his thumbs up, but also kind of moving his arms back and forth. And to me, it was.
I don't know. Hit it in the middle.
Move back from the
lines. I don't know.
Oh, No, I thought he was telling her to move back from the line.
Oh, move back?
Move back from – yeah, he was saying move back from the line. Yeah.
I don't know, man. I mean, from what I've read, I watch not a ton of tennis, but I'm definitely a tune in for the major sort of guy. I've never seen this called. I mean, they constantly show the boxes. They constantly show players turning to their boxes and saying things. I mean, the players, I guess, can say stuff that direction. I've never seen this called. I've never seen it called. I don't think it created an unfair advantage. You know, this seems and from what I read about this, my understanding is that Serena wasn't looking at him when he did it. If you look at it in real time, he's doing this gesture and she's not looking at him. That's what I was told. What I read.
I have to go back and see like that montage.
Like, who told the ref that he seen?
Yeah, I know. Somebody from the other side of the court must have seen that.
Yeah.
But anyhow,
it's technically a violation. I mean, this has been rehashed all week. It seems like, or a week and a half at this point. Was it technically a rules violation? Absolutely. Did it need to be called? Could it have been a warning? You know, whatever. I think so.
It was a warning.
Well, no, it was the first one is a point misconduct or
no.
Right?
The misconduct was she broke the racket. Yeah, so she already had the warning, and then it was smashing the racket, and then it was berating the judge. So it's kind of 1, 2, 3 punch right there that leads to everything. I mean, I had a
warning, point, and then game.
Yeah, warning. Well, I think that sounds right. Warning, point, game. Couple things before, obviously, we talk about the response, which is its own story. But I think we should just set. I want to establish here that throwing tantrums isn't okay. Like I think people who are defending Serena are not saying that throwing tantrums is okay. I don't think that that's an acceptable way of performing in your sport. You and I had discussed these people are super, super intense. Not just tennis players, but those kind of elite athletes. I mean, we've seen it from Jordan. We've seen it from Tiger. We've seen it from Larry Bird. We've seen it from Tom Brady berating his teammates on the sidelines. Mm-hmm. I think this is just a different – we're able to look at this under the microscope way, way closer than we are maybe those other sports. And so when people are comparing the treatment of Serena's tantrum to that of John McEnroe and other men who have thrown those tantrums, I guess I see the validity of that. I do think that she gets a lot of shit in ways that men do not. So I do think there's a gender element to that. I do think there's probably a race element to that. But I do want to say it's not okay to throw a tantrum. Like you and I aren't teaching our kids to throw tantrums like this. But again, we're dealing with a unique kind of individual here that we don't necessarily consider right. We need our athletes to be at that level if they're going to succeed. Does that make sense?
No, I think what I hear you saying, and I was going to make a similar point was, and a lot of people have made this kind of argument that the pressures that professional athletes at the highest level are under, and the competitive drive that has been sort of instilled in them is one that may result in this sort of, they're not ones to just she hasn't won all these majors and been the best player in tennis, one of the best athletes ever by shrugging off what she perceives as a slight, right, or what very well could have been a slight, right? Yeah. Does that make sense? So yeah, it's a hard thing to sort of parse. On the one hand, you don't. I agree. I think Serena would agree that all people in tennis who have done this, they've all kind of come out and said, "Yeah, I've done that sort of stuff or done worse things that Serena did, and it's embarrassing, and I wish I hadn't done it." But kind of that's the way that sort of happens. I don't know. I think you see this I'm sure you had moments like this when you were playing sports in high school, and I definitely was a competitive person where it's very easy to sort of lose sight of what you're doing in the moment and get really upset. So I'm not trying to excuse it, right? But I understand it.
We're talking about being in the flow, right? Like being in the flow of it, and how those premier athletes are just in the flow. And I think that's what we're talking about here, is being in such a mental space that losing your shit becomes very, very easy, and you can do it. I want to add real quickly. I told you to watch that Serena documentary. Did you watch it?
Oh, I never made it to the Serena documentary. It's on my list.
If for those of you who are watching who are Serena haters, or you don't really, you have an issue with what she did, totally get it. But I would suggest going to HBO and watching that 5-part documentary, because my wife and I watched it over the weekend, and it just adds so much perspective to who she is as a person, that you don't forgive her for what she's done, but it helps you understand it. Some of the stuff, dude, like to give birth to a kid. And then to make 2 Grand Slam finals within 12 months of giving birth, and having a C-section too, right? That's what's crazy. To me, that is just wild. Like that goes to show that she is a very, very intense athlete. And obviously, as soon as that, I mean, she was training up to birth, and she was training nearly immediately afterward. As soon as she got the go ahead from her doctor, I think it was a couple, 3 or 4 weeks. And there's an interesting scene. I think I told you about this. Second to last episode, maybe the last episode, in which she has decided to go to France to prepare for the French Open and to train with her coach, the guy who was doing the thumbs up and the moving back and forth. And she's just not progressing the way that she needs to in order to compete at the French Open. And he tells her, if you're going to compete, you have to stop breastfeeding. Like, can you, like, the trust, but like, it doesn't come across as sexist, right? At all, because we've been led up to that point to see and to experience the trust that an elite athlete has with their coach. And they trust that coach to tell them the truth. And it's fucking crazy, man. Like, to say, look, you're going to have to do that, because she couldn't lose, I think, 8 to 10 pounds. Right. And this is, again, not a sexist comment. She understood that she wasn't able to move laterally as fast as she needed to, with that extra 8 to 10 pounds. And she was holding on to that because she was breastfeeding. And for her coach to say, hey, you got to drop those pounds if you want to win. It was just this intense moment. Even Catherine was like, wow, but we understand it, right? You understand it. You get it. It's not offensive, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Well, no, but it also points to something that sometimes gets ignored, right? I mean, these are conversations that happen in the workplace all the time when we talk about workplace gender discrimination, right? Or sex discrimination, which is, sometimes people, don't tend to hire women because they're worried or concerned that they're going to get pregnant and not be able to focus on their job, or they don't get promotions for the same reason. And that's obviously a huge problem that is an issue for a different podcast. But this doesn't get talked about as much in tennis as it should. I mean, how many great tennis stars have taken, sabbaticals or hiatuses to have kids who would have otherwise been great? And it's not something that we ever nod to. Right. Yeah. These are physical challenges that absolutely amazing athletes on the women's side have had to overcome that their counterparts on the men's side never ever have, which I think circles back to the issue that we're talking about, which is a lot of people reacted to this Serena thing by saying, there was just an article in like Tennis Weekly or Tennis Magazine or whatever that I just saw in defense of the referee that was like, yeah, those were all technically the right calls, and he's a good referee, and the stats back it up, so he'll be back despite what everyone thinks is a bullshit racist decision or sexist decision. And the answer back to that is not, it doesn't matter if they were technically the right calls, it's whether or not the standard is the same on both the men's and the women's side. The question is whether or not the standard is the same for people of color who are playing tennis at a really high level. I didn't see this Serena documentary, but I remember this from maybe a different 30 for 30 or something, when Serena and Venus first came on the scene. I don't know if you remember this. They had braided hair and they had lots of beads in them, right? Yep. And it became this big thing. There was a discussion in tennis as to whether or not a bunch of players complained about it and wanted them to ban the beads that were in their hair because they were noisy and they were distracted. When they would swing, the noise would hit. It would happen. And then there was actually a match where, I don't know if it was Serena or Venus, but one of like the rubber bands came out and the beads actually fell all over on the court or whatever. But like, that's where else in tennis are you seeing these conversations, right? You can chalk this reaction up to, oh no, it's really just unfair for people to have a specific hairstyle or something. Well, that's bullshit, right? What you're really uncomfortable with is two black women playing tennis, and your racism is showing, right? Yep. Another example of this, and we never got to this on the podcast, though we meant to, was the French Open banning the cat suit, right? Serena was wearing the all black, I don't know what to describe it. It was like a tennis, they called it the cat suit, like a tennis outfit. Like, why in the world do we need to ban? Was it the French? Well, some tournament said she couldn't wear it anymore. It's absolutely bananas,
I know.
Like, we're not having conversations about what other people are wearing. Or in the U.S. Open, we didn't talk about this on the podcast either. Who was the woman who, it was like 1,000 degrees, and they gave him a break between sets, and she took off her shirt and put on another one, but she put it on backwards. And so during the tennis match, she took her shirt off, wearing a sports bra, really quickly turned around, and she actually turned around when she did it, and she got a game misconduct penalty, just like Serena. And then when that happened, this got swept under the rug because of the Serena stuff. There was people who were pissed off showing montages on Facebook of all these dudes taking off their shirts at their chairs. Like, why? It doesn't make a difference what the rule is. That makes a difference if it's equally enforced or not, right? The answer can't just be, oh, she broke a rule. That does not make it okay. We can enforce rules in unequal ways, and that can expose, right, biases based on sex, based on race, based on all sorts of things.
This thing just gets thrown under the microscope because of Serena. If you ask me, like, we have never, I would argue we've never seen a female athlete who is unwilling to just shut up, right? Like, this is, and I don't mean, again, she just doesn't want to. She shouldn't have to. And that's not the acceptable woman that we expect in our sports discourse, but it's not the acceptable Black woman. I think that there's an element of that. And people who are upset, I think you got to like consider what is making you upset about Serena. Not just this last weekend, right? But over time, she has consistently been under scrutiny for how she acts and what she does in ways that we just simply don't do for other women. And then when you throw the racial element in there, I think it just adds a level of it, and a level of complexity that makes it even more difficult necessarily to understand. And it takes the time and the attention that Brian and I are trying to give you to have those conversations. I want to talk because we are. Yeah, go ahead.
Just a quick example of this. Del Potro, who was in the final of the U.S. Open, lost his shit at a ref. I watched this match live in the quarterfinals. For like 5 straight minutes was yelling at this dude.
Yeah, I did see that.
And the straw that broke the camel's back in this Serena match was a coach doing this.
I know. Oh my God. Here's the thing, right? Let's talk about the cartoon. So there's the cartoon. We posted it across our social media platforms. Australian cartoonist draws this cartoon of Serena throwing a fit, slamming her racket, jumping up and down.
There's
and
a pacifier on the ground.
There's a pacifier, right? In the background, you have the referee, and the line judge, and Osaka, and he's saying, what does he say to her? Just let her win, or if you just let her win. Yeah. Obviously,
well, there's a question about whether or not it's Osaka or not in the cartoon.
Okay,
I don't think it's supposed to be Osaka, but whatever.
It's just some general. But again, it's still the frail, not so much woman of color. Yeah. I think that's there. There's a component of to that. So I know what your take is on this, and then I want you to respond because I want to hear. Yeah, I just got to get this out before I forget in case people shut us off. I think we have to think about if you think that the cartoon is not racist. I do believe that on the surface that argument can be valid, and I do understand where you're coming from. But I have to, and especially those who are comparing this cartoon to, say, a political cartoon, and I get that comparison. I see where you're coming from. You're comparing the art, the craft itself. But I think I was thinking about this yesterday. The thing to consider is that caricatures of African Americans or Africans writ large have tended to be or are grounded in racism. And historically, they are grounded in racism in ways that caricatures of politicians, white people, men, women, not of color, are not. And I think you have to contextualize that cartoon in order to understand why people are upset about it and why people are calling it racist. And I think once you just add that level and you say, look, hey, I get what you're saying. I understand why you think it's not racist, but we have to consider history here. It helps to understand that. Is that clear to you too? I mean, I was thinking about this yesterday and kind of parse this out. And obviously there's a paper there that you and I should probably write. But I mean, it's so grounded in history, and the history of cartoons, of African Americans, of the Sambo character, Jim Crow cartoons is just laden with racism. That's where it comes from in ways that we don't have with political cartoons that are being compared in this situation.
Yeah, and those accentuated physical characteristics that were really common in those kind of archetypal racist caricatures, the Sambo and I'm misremembering my college class on this, but all those different caricatures that we sort of know about also set the stage and became the same things that we saw in like undeniably racist things like blackface, right? So I mean, I think you don't have to dig very deep to look at this picture and say that it's drawing on stereotypes about black people and the physical characteristics that are in a racist way associated with those people and exaggerating them. I think that on that point alone, there's an argument to be made that there are some racist or overly racialized overtones or undertones happening in that political cartoon. I want to say too, right, that like, and we sort of had this conversation on the text message. I think we oversimplify these conversations to say whether or not a thing is racist or not, right?
Yeah, we certainly do.
Is this racist or is this not racist, right? Is the artist racist or is the artist not racist? That's not the way that we have to look at it, right? It's very, if that's the way we're going to have the conversation, then I'm never, ever, ever going to be able to prove that anything, this or any other thing, is 100% racist, that it's either racist or it's not. But I think I can make a pretty good case for the comment that's being made by the cartoon is problematic, right? Going back to the conversation we had before about kind of equal enforcement of the rules. I think it's trying to flip that trope on its head. I sent a text message to you that I think there's an argument that the commentary of the political cartoon is maybe making a point about, things like affirmative action. I think that the cartoon is sort of, I personally don't think it was supposed to be Osaka. I think my read of the cartoon is that it was supposed to be, well, what's the alternative to enforcing the rules? And the political cartoon is answering that question by saying, well, if we're not going to enforce the rules, the only option we have is to let this person win, right? And that argument on its face, I think, is problematic because it doesn't acknowledge the unequal enforcement of the rules, right? That's not the alternative. The alternative to what happened at the U.S. Open is not to just let Serena in. It's for this official to get control of the match and realize that it's a final and that issuing a game misconduct or a full game penalty is insane. It's never happens, right? It doesn't happen because we're trying to see the best two tennis players compete. So it's the logical fallacy of the cartoon is that the two options that we have are A, the final that we saw where all these game penalties happen, or B, the referee lets Serena win. Well, that's not the only two options, right? There's a middle ground, and we see that middle ground play out all the time where officials recognize that it's intense, that these are people who are competitively driven. We hear what they have to say, kind of tell them to calm down, and then go back to playing tennis and actually have a result, right? So again, it's not, is any one thing racist or not racist? No, we can't have that conversation. Are there things that I can point to and say, boy, these are problematic for me. These make me question what you were thinking, right? The image, the commentary, all the different things that are happening, inside of the cartoon. Point to me at least saying, I think I said this to you, I wouldn't have published it,
Yeah, I know.
If someone came to me and was like, can I put this up? I'd be like, I wouldn't. That seems like a terrible idea.
Yeah, I know. It's very, very.
But the conversation, right? This is important because the conversation on social media became, this is definitely racist. This is definitely not racist. Well, that's not a fruitful conversation. Let's talk about why.
Yeah.
Right?
No, I think there was
and this is the Kaepernick conversation too, right? Is Nike they're right or they're wrong? Well, listen, let's have a conversation about it, right? There's nuance, there's complexity here. Let's figure it out.
And those of you who are watching and listening to Brian and I right now, we are encouraging you to engage with us in conversation about this via email. We are sportsnerds@gmail.com, but also across the social media platform. And this week we had actually a really, really fruitful engagement for people on both sides of the debate on Instagram. Of course, there were some dumb comments. There were some racist comments, but there were also some kind of flippant identity politics comments that didn't go into depth. And so we do appreciate everybody engaging with this because that's what we're trying to do, right, Brian? Like last week, we're trying to do this thing. We're trying to have this conversation, a deeper conversation about really, really complex stuff in ways that people just don't get out there. So I think you nailed it on the head. I'm anxious to see, people watch the documentary. Brian, go watch the documentary because Serena's going to win next year. She's going to win, I think, at least one or two majors. I would hope that she wins more. She's just fun to watch, man. She's fun to watch in ways that Tiger's fun to watch when he's dominant. It's insane. And you know what? Do you want to make some comments about Osaka here? Because I was looking at her run in the U.S. Open is just impressive. She faced almost no challenge. She dominated. There was a fourth round challenge in which I think they went to a third set, but dude,
she's really good.
She is very, very good.
Which is weird because I watched a fair amount of this U.S. Open. I'd say probably too much. I should have been doing other things, but I had heard that I think it was during the semifinal from Serena's coach, the same guy who got her the penalty or whatever, that they were not really concerned about her coming into the U.S. Open because the last couple tournaments that she had not looked good. That she had gone out in like the first round of the Cincinnati Open or something like that. So, but I had also heard it was one of the McEnroes who was saying, no, she's a stud and she's going to be really, really good, and she was a player to watch out for. She beat another American in the semifinals, handedly. It was not even fun to watch. It was like a 4-3 or something like that. 6-4, 6-3, 6-4, 6-2. Just absolutely smoked her. It wasn't even fun to watch because I was kind of deep down hoping for 2 Americans in the final so we could have some American tennis pride back. But that didn't happen.
Yeah, dude.
Yeah. No, she's really good. And by the way, it really sucks for her too. And I'm sure that there's a contingent out there who thinks it's Serena ruined her moment. I'm more in the referee ruined her moment, but it was really disappointing to see how upset she was to win that way because she didn't do anything. It wasn't her fault, obviously. But I thought Serena was actually pretty cool about it during the award ceremony.
Dude, she didn't
keep pushing the issue. She was like, "Hey, sorry, it's your moment. You won."
Dude, she did an interview on Ellen, I think Osaka did, and it's fast. Like it made me like Serena more because of what she said. Serena told her after the match, and apparently Osaka thought that the crowd was booing her, and Serena kind of stepped in and said, "Look, they're not booing you. Right? This isn't, Yes. And then she said she was proud of her. Like, and she said, like, dude, okay. Think about who Serena is on and off the court in the same way that you think about who our other athletes are on and off the court. And I would definitely make the argument that if I had to pick a role model for my kid, it would be Serena Williams over a Tom Brady.
Isn't that funny? Yeah. Even we before were talking about, you can't have the temper tantrums. It's a bad message that you're sending. I mean, she didn't have a lot of time to process it before she gives those comments during the award ceremony, or was it the press conference right after the award ceremony, where she was saying, look, I didn't think I was ever going to win this fight. I was going to win this, or they were going to, give me the points back or anything. But it was about, giving the next person who feels like they're being, treated unfairly the courage. The next woman who feels like she's being, being treated in a sexist way, or the next person of color who feels like they're being subject to some subtle racism, to have the courage to kind of stand up and do what they were doing. I mean, it wasn't a speech that was written for somebody. It was awesome. It was great. I mean, for anyone to speak like that right after a really emotional situation, and to really explain what she was doing in like I said, a way that would absolutely you're a good role model in that moment, right?
Agreed.
It's easy to be like, oh, you slammed your racket down, you're a bad role model. But all this other stuff, right, that we see in the documentary, and when we see her, even stuff she does on the court, obviously, but some of this other off the court stuff is, I think, worthy of praise. Yeah, it makes her she's a superstar undeniably, but supports that superstar status for me.
Troy just made a good comment. Like some of her, like this is the idea of the tantrum, like her explaining away her tantrum. I think that is problematic. So again, I for those of you who have an issue with that in sportsmanship, I totally get it. Because I think a lot of the people out there who are criticizing this have an issue with that. But again, separate what's on the court versus what's off the court. And I think we begin to see her true character in those comments after. And I wonder how much of this has to do with her being a parent too. Like it changes the game when you know that your kids are going to be consuming video of you down the road, right? I wonder if that's a thought that she has. Like after she's like, oh shit, my daughter's going to watch this video of me throwing a tantrum someday. I need to correct it by being a good loser, right? By being an actual, like not being an ass. Like I don't know, man.
I'm just saying afterwards, there's a different version of this press conference or the interview with her where she says, oh, F that guy, and he screwed me out of my championship and killed my legacy.
Yeah.
That's not what she said.
Yeah.
She was like very direct. This isn't about me, right? This is about an injustice and trying to set the stage for future people to be able to not be subjected to it. For people in the future, rather, to not be subjected to it. Like again, if that's not enough to make you love Serena, then you're never gonna love her.
I mean, I guess I just think about her in terms of her humanity and her empathy compared to other professional athletes. And there are people we put up on a pedestal who are just terrible people. And again, you and I try to evaluate things on and off the court. I think about LeBron versus Jordan, right? LeBron being a good person off the court, doing a lot of great things for his community. Whether or not you agree with his politics, I don't care. It's the fact that he's actually doing things to improve his community in ways that I guess Jordan never did. And if we're going to,
I'm sure he did stuff, but it wasn't part of his, That's
his brand.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's very LeBron, right? The school's the most important thing he's ever done in his career, is what he said. Not off the court, but he includes that stuff, right? So I agree.
Yeah, go ahead.
In a slight defense of Jordan, I will say I think that we're in a more socially conscious, socially active kind of world, right? Social media makes that stuff more visible. I don't know. I'm leery of when we draw comparisons throwing other people under the bus, but I take your point. I don't disagree. So. Edit out that mumbling. It was not productive.
That's fine, but I think that's a perfect way to end it. As always, you can find Brian and I on the social medias. We are on Instagram at sports.nerds. We are on Facebook, facebook.com/sportsnerds. We're on YouTube. There is no /C/sportsnerds, Brian. It's just youtube.com/sportsnerds. We put our videos up there. We would love to have you engage with us via email. We are sportsnerds@gmail.com, or any of those other platforms. We get a lot of folks who comment on Twitter @_sportsnerds. But again, these conversations we've had over the last 2 weeks have been super, super deep and complex. And I think we are trying to push you listeners towards having a difficult conversation with those with whom you don't agree. And we understand that you get pissed off when politics and race and gender enter into your sports. And oftentimes sports are that escape for people. But we have now reached a cultural shift in which sports being an escape isn't really all that sports can be or are anymore. I think digital media has played a role in that. The internet, obviously, access to sports, close-up views of our athletes. Things have just changed, and I don't think we're going to return to that world in which we can somehow have sports that are apolitical. So we're here for you. We got your backs. We hope you'll engage with us. And now, if you've stuck around until the very end of the show, you can donate to Brian and I. We're not going to pocket any of that money, or at least not much of it. You go to anchor.fm/sportsnerds. You can throw $1 at us. You can throw $5 at us, whatever you want. Just know that those koozies that so many of you have are not free, nor are the stickers and the buttons. Right, Brian?
Yeah. Well, they are right now.
Yeah, they are right now. Right. Somebody's paying for them. All right, buddy. Fantastic show. Thanks to everybody who followed us and watched us on our live stream, and everybody else who listens. We hope you have a fantastic weekend, afternoon, morning, whenever you listen to this. Thank you for your time. Dude, we nailed it. It's a good show. Yeah. That was a really good show.
You probably are. We still on? We're not on Twitter anymore, right?
Hold on. It's still. I'm ending the broadcast.